First of all, can you introduce yourself, tell the listeners a little bit about your background and what makes you a good candidate to represent them in Westminster?
So, hello, my name is Elliot Tong, and I am the Green Party's candidate for North West Cambridgeshire in the upcoming general election. I have a lot of experience as an environmental and social activist in and around Cambridgeshire. A lot of this has been as a city councillor, where much of my work has focused on stuff involving housing, as well as alleviating poverty and working towards a cleaner and greener city. And these are all things I think Peterborough really needs right now. These are all skills that I think will be very useful and that I hope to draw upon if I were elected on the 4th of July.
What's your personal motivation for standing in this year's election?
So, at the moment, everybody's quite aware that our country's in a bit of a tricky situation. After a decade and a bit of conservative national government, we're not in the best state, and we've seen real harm to our different essential services and our quality of life. However, I'm not particularly convinced that Labour is going to offer much of an alternative. So we have seen them pick up and drop their pledges fairly arbitrarily. As an example, they have rolled back on some of their original environmental commitments. And because of that, I don't have a lot of trust in them. The Green Party, on the other hand, are getting some really big gains at the moment. So we've seen our membership grow massively over the last few years, and we've also seen the number of city councillors we've had just expand at a rapid rate. And that's because a lot of people are really excited by our fresh and bold policies. Now, this year, for the first time, we've tried to run in every seat around the country. I don't think we actually managed to achieve this. I think we were short of one because of a paperwork mistake. That tends to happen. But this is one of the first times we've made a really big push to be a party with a national presence. And because of that, I ran in North West Cambridgeshire because I really wanted to give the people around here an alternative, because I sense that's what people are hungry for right now.
Peterborough Council's funding from central government has been cut by over 37% in real terms since 2016 and 70% since 2013. The result of this has been cuts in services and a rise in council tax by over 40%. What will you and your party do to ensure the city gains the financial support it needs to continue to provide the services that its citizens want and need?
So it's really important to acknowledge that this is a national issue, not something that's exclusive to Peterborough. We are seeing city councils around the country financially struggling at the moment. I believe it's currently estimated we're going to see around 10% of city councils go bankrupt in the next decade. And because of that, I really think it's important now more than ever to start to devolve decision making down more to these communities. Personally, I want to empower local people as much as possible to have control and be able to make these decisions that impact their lives, because largely a whole bunch of people over in Westminster, they know less about the area and are probably going to make decisions that don't benefit residents as much, or are based on assumptions they make about residents. So because of this, we need to see national government move money into areas that aren't the most well-off places in the country. Obviously, the big one is London. We see huge amounts of national funding go towards London, whereas I want to see it go to places like Peterborough, because it's really important that everyone benefits from what we produce as a country, not just a couple of cities around the UK.
It's been said that Peterborough is an NHS dental desert, with people having to travel 50 miles to find one. There are also constant complaints about the difficulties of getting an appointment at the city's GPs, with appointments for the day gone by 1 minute past 8. What will you do to see a rapid improvement in the situation?
So, to be blunt, the NHS is being severely underfunded after a decade of austerity. I believe in real terms, this year, it's estimated that our funding to our health services has been cut by an estimation of £2 billion. And to me, this needs to be rectified immediately. I think we can bring the NHS back with our current funding model. The Green Party have pledged an annual spending on health and social care of 50 billion by 2030, along with a 20 billion capital investment. And the big thing I know everyone's going to be thinking is, where are we going to get this money from? And to me, we need to look towards asking more in tax from some of the richest people in our society, as in the millionaires and billionaires, because these people have made vast amounts of money through the amenities that our country offers. So it's only fair to expect some money to be given back to support other people that will hopefully go on to do the same sort of thing.
Peterborough's population grew by 17% between 2011 and 2021, the third fastest growth in the country. What's your plan or policy on where housing should be built in and around the city over the next 10 years?
Housing is really, really important to me, and it's been one of my main focuses as a social activist. I actually think it's essential for everybody to have a home. I think it's a fundamental right. However, we need to put a lot of thought into how we build houses. The Green Party has a mantra for housing, which is right homes, right place, right price. Because I don't want to see housing as an asset that is used by speculators to make a bit of money. I want to see housing as something that is used by the community so that everyone has an actual home to live in. The Peterborough Greens have been really, really supportive of some housing projects around the city. So, as an example, they have been working with the council on their £2 million eco homes project, which is looking into the best brownfield sites to use for housing around the city. Now, I wouldn't want to say at present what are the best brownfield sites to use because you know, I want to wait till more research is done. However, I think the key in my mind is we can reuse these brownfield sites. We should try not to use greenfield sites when possible because there's a lot of land that we can potentially use for very little cost or, environmental cost and social cost.
A report produced last year stated that for the city to reach net zero, it would cost in the region of £8.8 billion. What action will you take to promote environmental sustainability and address climate change locally without bankrupting the council?
So I'm a green. Obviously, climate change is one of my main interests. And something that I want to acknowledge again is it's a major issue facing everywhere in the country at the moment. And I don't think solving it is going to rely on one silver bullet. It's going to be a huge amount of little changes. We're going to have to really rethink about how our society is to make it a fairer and greener place. One thing I would love to see in the short term is eco taxes. So giving authorities the ability to put small taxes to try and incentivize some big companies to pollute less. This would get a bit of money back as well to try and reinvest in making the city a nicer place to live. Now, one of the bigger things we need to focus on is our public transport, because reliable public transport that is high quality is going to be really, really important to move us towards net zero. One of the things we, of course, need to do is actually invest more money into our public transport to make it a bit cheaper. However, I also think we need to make it easier to use because at the moment, if you consider things like rail, if you buy a train ticket, you'll get your ticket and you'll have stipulations on the times you can take the train between. You can only use certain rail providers. You might have to exchange in a certain place. And that can be really confusing for people and off-putting for people, especially if they're not familiar with public transport by rail. I use it a lot, so I know what I'm doing. However, every time I go to a new place, I often have to stop to think for a while and properly make a plan of my route. And if you have a car, you might think, oh, I'll just drive there. It's a lot easier. So in my mind, we need to look towards renationalising rail to make it a bit simpler and easier to use and run it for the collective good.
This year sees the first time in over 50 years that Speedway hasn't been taking place in the city after the Panthers were told they could no longer use the track at the showground. Would you support the Panthers to get back racing? And if so, how?
So the situation with the showground is very, very unfortunate. And I myself have some really fond memories of going down to the showground as a child or as a teenager. And I really hate to say it, but unfortunately, the East of England Agricultural Society, they do control the land. So I don't really have that much impact on what they do with it. Speedway have been asked if they could present a fully costed business plan, and they haven't been able to. So it looks quite unlikely it will be able to be kept, and that is upsetting for me too. However, that doesn't mean I would be, hands off with this if I were elected. AEPG are planning to develop on the site, and they've got some interesting plans. However, it's really important for any elected representative to work with groups like this and make sure that they stay on track and everything they do there is going to benefit the community. So I think that's what my commitment will be towards.
There's a feeling among some Peterborough residents that the city is treated like the poor cousin of Cambridge. How will you ensure that the city gets its fair share and becomes an equal county partner with Cambridge?
So I, for one, think Peterborough is an absolutely amazing city. It's got so much culture, and as a fan of the early modern period, I love looking at all the history there. However, this is something we've seen. Cambridge has long got a lot of focus. And we've seen it especially in the last year with Michael Gove's case for Cambridge. His plans for Cambridge, well, it was originally in 2030, then it was changed to 2040, then it was changed to 2050. But overall, the broad idea to look towards making Cambridge a kind of Silicon Fen in the long term. And I want to see Cambridge get a bit more attention. It would be great. However, it can't be, again, one of the sole focuses of national government. We need to make sure that we spread the output of our society towards all of the areas. And to go back to some of the measures I suggested earlier, I think it's a mixture of a funding problem, as in making sure that national government pays attention to areas like Peterborough, but also making sure we devolve power down to residents in Peterborough and North West Cambridgeshire so they have more control and more responsibility over how they live.
What would you say is the biggest challenge facing Peterborough over the next 5 years?
So I already think you've mentioned them, to be honest. I think climate change and housing are the two biggest challenges that Peterborough is currently facing. However, to not be boring, I decided to pick a third one, which is the cost of living crisis. Now, we're all struggling at the moment. It's almost definite that if you're listening to this right now, you've felt the squeeze of the current economic situation. And even if you haven't, you will know people that have. And to reference this point again, to me, everybody contributes in some way to society. So it's only fair we get a fair share of what is produced back. And this is going to take a lot of work. However, there's a few things I think we can do to start to make our society a more equitable place. One thing is strengthening workers' rights. We need to give workers the bargaining power so they can go to their bosses and say, hey, look, my company's producing a lot of money. It's probably fair. I get a bit more of that back. I also want to see a minimum wage increase to around £15 an hour. As our productivity increases, our minimum wage hasn't increased to match that. So an increase of this amount seems very reasonable. And in the long term, I'd like to see universal basic income implemented, where everyone gets the money they need to live a fulfilling life as we move towards a society of the future.
Finally, why are you and your party the best choice for the people of Peterborough to give their vote to in this year?
So, Ipsos polling earlier this month concluded that around 73% of people were quite unhappy with Rishi Sunak. And that seems to imply, okay, Labour then, people must love them. However, if you look at the same poll, over half of them are also disappointed by Keir Starmer. So we're in a situation where none of the two old parties are really pleasing people. And in my mind, that implies we need to start voting for some new political parties. We can't keep on voting for the same two parties and expect them to change. We're going to have to give our vote to fresh parties with fresh ideas. And I think the Green Party can offer that. Every single vote for the Green Party helps us grow as a movement in multiple ways, but one of them is through short money. So every 200 votes we get some money back to basically help us become more active in the area. Now, as I've already mentioned, we're seeing a huge growth in popularity at the moment with lots of new members and lots of new councillors. So honestly, this is our time in my eyes. I would encourage listeners right now to put your vote towards people who you actually want to represent you. You don't need to compromise and think, oh, I'll give it to the best of the two parties, because if you keep on compromising in that way, none of them are ever going to change. You have to actually vote for people that really represent your values. And I'm really excited to represent the Green Party because I think they're giving people that opportunity.
Elliot Tong, Green Party candidate for North West Cambridgeshire. Thank you for joining me on the Politics of Peterborough.